Bonjour tout le monde, good afternoon, and welcome to our third session. Hopefully all of you with me this afternoon, you've caught the first two sessions, and because it was so enjoyable, you're back for a third time. Welcome. We are going to jump right in because somebody, I don't know, not me, has a habit of going over 5:40 p.m. So let's just get started right away. As always, we'll just do a quick review of what we looked at for the last 2 days. So we looked at what is writing, we looked at the stages of writing, stages of spelling, the reading-writing connection, and many of the challenges that you have and we will face normally with the teaching of writing. As I mentioned yesterday, if you would like to use our Padlet to enter some additional challenges that you have, feel free to do so. I don't think I saw anything new yesterday, but you can continue entering as much as you want in that Padlet. We'll share the link again later in the session. Yesterday we looked at the writing workshop, and we understood it to be a structure, a framework for the way that you organize your writing lesson. Okay, and two aspects of the writing workshop that we focused on were the mini lessons and the mini lesson and the conferencing. Give me 1 minute, please. Thank you for your patience, people. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly and you can see me clearly. I just want to confirm. Just give me a thumbs up, please. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. I thought we were having some technical difficulties. Okay, so yes, yesterday we looked at the writing workshop, understood it to be a framework for the way that we structure our writing classes. We looked at the mini lesson, and we looked at conferencing, these two important parts of the writing workshop. We also paid attention to the timing that is given to each aspect of the writing workshop. Now, as I said yesterday, I want every session that we go into, we try to bring in those elements that we learned in the previous session. So today, as we're looking at the traits, see how what you've learned before actually links to what you're learning today and how the two approaches can be incorporated. As always, I just want to hit on a few housekeeping points. You can access the session, or your colleagues can access the session on Facebook. Since it's been streamed there, you can always go back later on and look at the session and hear all the boo-boos that I'm making at the very beginning of today's session. Okay, we are encouraging you to use the chat on both platforms for any questions, comments that you have. You've been doing some wonderful sharing both on the Zoom platform as well as the Facebook platform. Please continue to do that. There is going to be an opportunity for, even if it's a 5-minute opportunity at the end, to share some ideas that you have. Normally what we're going to do is put up one of the challenges that you've identified and see how what we've explored throughout the session can help to, can help with that particular challenge. The point that I'm going to reiterate, it's a safe learning space, a sharing space. We do not want any blame and judgment, and anything that we say during this session, that is definitely not the intention. So please feel free to, if you get an opportunity to use your mic, to share, please feel free to do so, and feel free to use the chat as much as you like. Of course, with about 40 to 45 minutes, there isn't it isn't possible to say everything that we can about a particular topic. So we are encouraging you to do some additional reading. And as we did for the last 2 days, we will put some links in the chat. I have also prepared a shared folder with the slides and a document with the links that you can use. I will be sharing it towards the end of the session so that you can always open that and review whatever content you want to. Okay? If you're new to the session, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Say what school you're from, what grade you're teaching, and what are some of the things you're expecting from this session. But for now, we shall head into session 3, the 6 traits of writing. Now, from the time this was mentioned yesterday, someone put in the Facebook chat, Tasha Pascal put in the Facebook chat that there's a great book by, it's Evan Moore, I believe, with some information on the 6 traits of writing and how to do that kind, how to develop those 6 traits through daily writing. And she says that she does have a text that she really likes that she's been using. So hopefully we can get that teacher to maybe share that resource with us if it's possible. All right. There are a few sites with really good explanations of what the 6 traits are about, some suggestions on how to teach, what activities you can do to help develop those 6 traits, and some suggested mini lessons as well. So we're going to put 3 of those links in the chat for you. Check them out. You can save them. Again, they will be in the shared folder for you that you can check them out later. So if you just want to give the session your complete attention, that is totally fine. Okay, let's start by discussing and just kind of revising in some ways what makes good writers, right? Now I have a few things up here and you would notice that these are things we've discussed from session 1. First, having students analyze models of good writing. Now, those models of good writing should not only be narrative text. You also want it to be informational text. You want it to be poetry. You want it to be blog posts. You want it to be infographics. All of these can be used as models. Now, of course, you want to maximize the time in your class. So you would not necessarily be using the text, these reading texts only at the beginning of a writing lesson. It may be something that you're using as a read aloud for your class, or even something that you have explored in your content area in a social studies class, in a science class, and so on. The second point we spoke a bit about yesterday, explicit teaching of strategies that students are going to use as they write, as they revise, as they edit, even as they publish their work. The third point about collaboration, remember that according to the writing workshop, students can write in pairs. And it links in some ways to the penultimate point about becoming a community of writers, that if you have students working together to share their ideas, to support each other in their writing process, that helps to create that community. And of course, the sharing aspect at the end of the writing workshop does help with building that community as well. Assigning specific goals for each writing project. So students are writing with a purpose. The same way we have students reading with a purpose, which improves their reading comprehension and their reading skills, we want them writing with a purpose as well. Having daily writing experiences. Now, sometimes when we think of writing, we think about a long, involved text, a full page or a couple pages. That is not the only thing writing is. We are aware of that. So you can have students do daily writing in the form of, notes, poetry that they write, little ads, short letters, responses to something that you've posted. I can never forget visiting Moshi Primary and seeing that the teacher puts a letter on the board for the students saying, "Good morning, students. Today is Wednesday." I'm talking about something interesting that they're either going to do for the day or something that happened at the school. And students would actually come in and they would read it. Sometimes they would write down the letter, and that letter is on the board for the students very early in the morning as they come in. And even having the students respond to something like that is a daily writing task, right? It's a way of helping them develop writing stamina and develop their writing skills. Learning to use the writing process, and not just using the writing process, but notice for a variety of writing purposes. So again, you have to explore what are the various purposes for writing, who are the various audiences you may write for, and going through that writing process so that students have a repertoire of writing skills for different writing purposes. All right, we mentioned becoming a community of writers. Notice it says that includes the teachers, right? And using classroom-based writing assessments. So what do we mean by that? We're looking specifically at formative assessment, which means as teachers, we keep track of student writing. Sometimes because we have students with specific goals for writing for the day, we know what it is we're looking for as we're, maybe reading over their shoulders or conferencing it with them on the text that they're writing. Keep notes, because these notes will help you determine a future focus of a mini lesson or a small group intervention. There's nothing to say that you will use every item of notes that you've written, but it's better to have the notes than not have it. All right. I'm going to share now all of this has come from research. I'm going to share a link in the chat where this research has been synthesized on the educationnorthwest.org site, right? But of course, you can do additional research to find out what are some of the things that really make good writers, all right? So about these traits, why would we want to focus on these traits? Because these traits are elements of good writing, regardless of the type of writing. It could be a poem, it could be, a poster, it could be a persuasive text, it could be a narrative. All of these types of writing would have these 6 elements in them. Now, when we know that students can identify these traits, then when they are writing their own text or creating their own text, they can ensure that these traits are there. They will be able to also tell whether their writing has those very good elements, right? Because again, it's a process, students will be working from where they are to where we want them to be. We can have student writers focusing on developing specific traits as they're writing. So over time, they're focusing on developing different traits, on demonstrating different traits in their writing. And then maybe by the end of a period of time, we know that they are strong in demonstrating certain traits in their writing. Okay, and of course, as we can imagine, when we focus on the traits, we focus on specific goals, as we mentioned earlier, it makes it easier for the students to get targeted feedback on what they write. So as opposed to us talking about everything about writing, we are now able to say, okay, we are working on on developing this trait or demonstrating this particular trait in our writing. How did you do today? Okay. Let's talk a little again about the mini lesson. The mini lesson, now I'm talking about this before we go into the traits, because as we go into the traits, we want to see the role that mini lessons are going to play. When you are beginning, the beginning of implementing your writing workshop, you want to actually introduce all of the traits to the students. You want them to know what the traits are and what are signs that these traits are present in the text, in the material that they write. Okay? You want to use a mini lesson to introduce each trait. Now remember, a mini lesson is about 10 minutes, which means you're not spending a lot of time talking about this trait. You are really just introducing this trait to the student. And you're doing this in quick succession. Why? Because you don't want them to believe that writing is just about ideas or it's just about organization. You want them to understand that all of these traits come together to create an excellent piece of writing. Okay? So one suggestion is to actually introduce each trait, introduce a trait a day, as you're introducing these traits to the students at the beginning of your writing workshop. And then over time, because we're using a spiral approach, over time, we go a little more in depth with each of these. And however you introduce that first trait, you know, if you have a mentor text, you talk about it, you point it out, and you demonstrate. Use that same method to introduce all of the traits so that the students realize, yes, these are all parts of a whole. All right. What we are teaching the students is we're not teaching the trait, right? We're teaching students skills to demonstrate each of the traits in their writing, right? And we're saying that because the way that a trait will be demonstrated depends on a particular style of writing. And we'll see that a little later as we look at one of the traits. So let's jump into the traits themselves. There are, I should have probably just put all of the traits together for us to see, but we have 6 traits and we're going to go through each of the traits one at a time. The first trait is ideas. Now, what I've done for each of the traits is to just put the key question that essentially answers, if that's answered, it tells you that this trait is demonstrated in a child's writing. And I've put in some keywords here under the word evidence for you. And then on the other side, we have some areas where you can conduct mini lessons on in order to help students build a skill to demonstrate this trait. Okay, so what are ideas? We need to answer the question, does the writer engage the reader with fresh information or perspective on a focused topic? Now notice some keywords like a focused topic, right? Engage, information, perspective, and even the word fresh. So this is normally what we would call content, right? When we have a rubric, I'm assessing the student. So what is the main message? What is the theme? What are the main ideas and the supporting details that are being provided in this piece of writing? And are those ideas interesting, important, informative, right? Now, as you're conducting mini lessons, what are some areas that you can conduct mini lessons on to build skills, writing skills that will help students demonstrate this trait of ideas in their writing? Now just run through them and you will see that all of them actually relate to how you develop content, right? Look at point number 4, details, development, and elaboration. Details, development, and elaboration. I think one of the challenges that someone identified in our Padlet was that, students aren't really developing their ideas. They don't know how to develop an idea. Generally, all of the challenges that we have with student writing might be hinting to us that we need to be explicit, as we mentioned a couple of times already. So if we break down all of these little skills here, it tells us that we actually have to spend time teaching students explicitly how to write for a purpose, for instance. We have to spend time teaching them how to narrow a topic. We have to do a think aloud. We have to demonstrate, how do I go from climate change to the impact of climate change on small island developing states, right? How do I narrow that topic? How do I elaborate on an idea, right? If I have a main point, I have identified my main point. What are some ways I can elaborate on that? I can explain it further. I can explain a particular word or phrase in that main idea. I can use an example. I can use a contrast. I can highlight a problem related to that main idea and its possible solutions. So there are various ways that I can elaborate, or I can even develop a point further, right? Supporting ideas with examples. What are good examples to support an idea? What are various ways that I can introduce these examples? All right. And for the last point, we're looking at narrative specifically. How do I develop plot, characters, and setting, right? All of these focus on this trait of ideas, or what we normally know as content. Now the time is flying already, so let me hustle. The second one, organization, another area that we're pretty familiar with. Does the organizational structure enhance the ideas and make them easier to understand? You know, when a piece of writing is disorganized, it's very difficult for a reader to get the main ideas, to follow the logic in a piece of writing, and the same goes for our students. So when we think about organization, we think about how the piece of writing is structured, whether there's coherence, whether the theme is being addressed throughout that piece of writing, what pattern or sequence is being followed, and whether information is being logically presented, right? What can you have mini lessons on? Pre-writing and planning. I cannot possibly overemphasize planning in terms of organization, because that is where students can see the connection between and among ideas that they want to develop, and they will decide on what sequence they're going to use to develop their writing. Okay, look at point number 3, like ideas clumped together. At the secondary level, are you immediately thinking of, summary writing that the students have to do at the CSEC level? Isn't that something that they really have to do? Hook and ending components, clear transitions, because transitions help you establish coherence, and cohesion, because the transitions help link or, clamp one idea onto the other, show how it's related. The next trait is voice. Now, voice is maybe a little challenging to explain to the students what it is and how it should be demonstrated. So our key question is, does the reader hear the writer speaking in the text? And what we're really saying is, what is the tone of the text? Everyone who writes can have a tone. Sometimes you can read a piece of writing and you can tell who wrote it. That's because some people have a particular style, a particular tone. Now, it's generally the writer's attitude. And as a good writer, your tone can change, or your attitude can change from text to text, right? If I'm writing a piece of poetry, for instance, or if I'm writing a story, if I'm writing a persuasive text, or if I'm writing an informational text, the writer's attitude or the tone may differ depending on the purpose for writing. So if I'm trying to entertain, if I'm trying to persuade, or I'm just trying to inform, right? What are some of the mini lessons you can do here? Writing to an audience. Now that's a very important way of determining what tone you're going to use, right? Who am I writing to? Who are my readers going to be? How do I want them to feel as they read my text? Do I want them to be excited? Do I want them to be worried? Do I want them to realize I'm being sarcastic, so that can prompt them to think, right? Generally, as point 3 says, it's a reflection of the writer's attitude or feelings towards his or her topic, right? As I mentioned before, these attitudes can shift within a piece. Now I have pulled up a little example here of voice, right? Our students can write like this. Good luck, Shadow. Keep flying, little butterfly. Maybe we think that's great, right? But let's reread. Let's read the revision. When I figured out I had to let you go, Shadow, I was heartbroken. I hope you're safe. Be careful. Be hopeful. Keep going. Do you see the difference between something that may be voiceless and voice, right? Good luck, Shadow. Keep flying, little butterfly. That's nice. That's a nice piece of writing. But now we can almost hear the heartbreak in the writer's voice. Huh? When I figured out I had to let you go, I was heartbroken. The hope, be careful, be hopeful. So all of these emotive words are demonstrating the writer's attitude and feeling towards his or her subject, which is a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, right? So this is an example of voice. Now, can you imagine the process you need to go through to get students to change from writing this to writing this, right? It's going to be a process. Always remember it's going to be a process, and it will take some time. Word choice. Word choice is interesting. Does the language convey precise and compelling meaning and or create a vivid picture for the reader? So we're talking about the choice of words and phrases that are used? Does it create images in the reader's mind? Does it appeal to the senses? Does the writer make use of figurative language? Those are the devices like similes and metaphors and personification, alliteration where necessary, onomatopoeia, these kinds of devices. Now, look at the last point. We're not saying that word choice needs to be these fancy flowery words. No, but has the writer skillfully chosen the perfect word or phrase or the perfect vocabulary for a specific effect, right? So if I want to create suspense, have I used the correct words, you know? And we can see how word choice can even can connect to sentence fluency, which we'll be looking at next. Now, how do you help a student develop excellent word choice? You want to explore words with the students. Now, as they read mentor texts, you want them to capture words that they find interesting, right? You want to go through exercises where they look at verbs and adjectives, you know, those that are usually overused, and how can we get more vivid synonyms? Because these vivid verbs or adjectives, they capture so many ideas in a short word or phrase. How can we use those in our writing instead? You want to help students see how they can take one sentence, right? A sentence as simple as the boy walked down the hill, and just pack so much meaning into it by the use of adjectives and the use of more vivid action verbs. So as opposed to walk down the hill, he tumbled down the hill, or he ambled down the hill, or he staggered down the hill, really captures a lot more information through the use of vocabulary. All right? Off we go to sentence fluency. Sentence fluency, does the writer control sentences so that the piece flows smoothly when read aloud? Right? You know when a piece is written well, when you don't pay attention to the sentences, when all you're doing is you're paying attention only to the ideas in there. So sentence fluency here refers to the rhythm and the flow of the piece. Now, we know sometimes our students may start all of their sentences the same way or use the very same sentence structure. What we're talking about here is how does varying those sentences in terms of the length of the sentences, the way they begun, the structure that they use, the style, how does that create a particular sound as you are reading the text, right? Your mini lessons would focus on things like different sentence structures that you can use, how to vary simple sentences with complex sentences, how to use simple sentences for particular effect. You know, you want to create that tension we just mentioned, you use those simple sentences, right? How to begin your sentences in different ways. Now, generally, when we're teaching standard English, we like to think, you know, that there are certain ways you don't begin a sentence. That was kind of one of the rules we had. But depending on the type of text, and by looking at mentor texts, good examples. Now, these mentor texts are not just texts that are created specifically for the classroom. Eh? These are texts that you would want to take from magazines, from books, from novels, from online that have good blog posts, and show the students how sentences can begin in different ways and have different structures, right? We have conventions, and the conventions are specifically spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and grammar usage, right? One of the things the note here says, pay attention to this. When we're looking at conventions, we want to be cognizant of the fact that students are developing these conventions as they go through the different grade levels, right? So obviously the way that we would treat conventions at the grade K level will be different from the way we would treat conventions at the Form 1 or the Form 3 level, right? And of course, I think these are one of the areas that we know very well how to teach. We do a lot of those kinds of instructions in our class. As you are, notice a mini lesson is on readable spelling. I thought we would just say spelling, right? Depending on the level that the student is at, some students will be writing phonetically, right? They'll be writing how the word sounds. And that is perfectly correct, right? So teaching students how to look at, notice the sounds in words and write them out for their grade level is perfectly acceptable. And we want to train them in paying attention to the sounds in words. Okay, now these are the six traits. There's a +1, and the +1 is presentation, right? It's not a trait, but as you can imagine, if you think about the slides that we just went through there, what made it comfortable for you to look at those slides is the way it's presented. You know, there's a heading, there's a particular way that the space was used. We didn't have a whole lot of blank space, you know, and everything written in tiny text at the top of the slide and a lot of blank space at the end. No. Presentation looks at how the piece of writing, when it's published, how it looks visually, what kind of visual appeal it has, and how sometimes the visuals are balanced with the text, with the words themselves, right? So in some pieces of writing, you will have graphics, and you look at things like the student's handwriting. Obviously, if the student has already mastered these motor skills, but at the grade K level, obviously, we will not be saying we're judging the student's handwriting, right? If the material is typed, the font selection, is it big enough for people to read? You know, sometimes when we, you know, since we're doing this online, I could use a variety of fonts here because you're going to be seeing practically the same size that I am seeing. But if you're displaying something on a screen for an entire class, sometimes our choice of colors, right? It may look really good on the screen, but when it's displayed, it's blinding, right? The fonts that we use, whether we have fonts that are curly, makes it very difficult to read. If we have borders on our pages, right? This really refers to the presentation, and it's really something that you would pay attention to possibly at the publishing stage of the writing process that we'll be looking at yesterday. We'll be looking at tomorrow, not yesterday. We'll be looking at tomorrow. Okay, now, not tomorrow, sorry. Next week, Monday. Wow. Apparently my days are only made up of the writing PD sessions, okay? So that's why we said tomorrow. So how do you go about helping students demonstrate, develop the skills to demonstrate each of these traits? You do not want to focus on all of the traits at once, right? You want to focus on one or two of the traits, let's say during a writing unit, or a writing task if they become more fluent in their writing. And you want to maybe explore a trait across different types of text. So here's an example. Each type of text relies or must have organization, right? But depending on the type of text, that organization will be different. For instance, organization in persuasive or argumentative text includes a what and a why structure, right? In the introduction, you'd identify the topic, the writer's opinion or the stance on it. And in the middle, you will develop reasons to explain why the writer has a particular stance, right? How would you organize a how-to informative piece? You will use a chronological structure, right? Again, your topic would introduce your introduction, will identify the topic or the concept, and then the body will describe the steps to achieving that particular thing, right? Now that's just one example of the informative structure. How are narratives organized? There's a who, a what, and a how structure. So usually the beginning may introduce the character or even sometimes the character and the problem, right? The problem is the what, the character is the who, and the resolution is the how, you know, how this problem is explored and then resolved, right? We're going to put in some links in the chat with activities that you can do for each of the traits, okay? And it's from two of the sites that I suggested that you use if you want to, or when you want to explore this a little more, right? You want to, as you're developing the skills, as we mentioned before, make your mentor text part of your lessons. So that could be your reading lesson or your content lesson. And as the students are building the skills to demonstrate each trait, you want to remind them to keep incorporating those, right? So let's say you've looked at 3 of the traits, you know you're on the 4th one, you remind the students, okay, so as you go off writing, remember that you have already mastered how to demonstrate ideas, sentence fluency, voice, okay? So make sure that you address these as you're going through your writing session. Okay, now I put a note down here. All of this requires that you plan carefully. And this is where I say, you know, plan with a colleague. Plan with someone else is going to make the process easier for you, especially as you learn each other's rhythm for planning, and you learn each other's strong suits, their strong points as it comes to planning. All right, because imagine you want to incorporate the mentor text, you want to see, okay, how many traits can I focus on for this period of time? How many units do I want to use this term, etc. You really do have to plan ahead. Okay. The conference. How are we incorporating the writing traits again in the writing workshop? Well, during the conference, you are speaking with students about their writing. You may either be addressing the product, what they've done, or you may be addressing their process, how they're going about doing that writing. You want to conference with the students on the skills that they're using and the traits that they're demonstrating, right? The trait that they're working on demonstrating in their text. Again, that makes the feedback targeted. You want to make sure that you highlight what the students have done well, right? So let's say they've begun working on the different traits. You want to commend them on traits that they've done, that they've demonstrated that they've already mastered, right? And then you want to give them a comment on an area where the student can continue to make some progress. Again, this would vary by your student level, all right? Whether it's grade K, Form 4, Form 5, Form 3, but also at what stage of writing they are, writing fluency or writing mastery that they are. So at the beginning stages, you want to give the student one piece of feedback that they could work on. Your conferencing will not take very long with students when you're looking at the process, right? So if you're doing a conference, a process conference, where you're looking at how the student is going about developing that skill, you may spend 2 or 3 minutes with that student. If you're doing more like a product conference, you're looking at the entire piece that the student has written, you will spend a longer time there. And obviously you will do that with students who have, as we mentioned, stronger writing stamina. All right? Use the rubric. However, you cannot use the rubric as if it's a surprise. Ta-da, here's a rubric that I'm going to use to assess your work. It must be something that is already presented to and discussed with the students, right? So in addition to knowing the traits, they also know what standards you'll be using, not just you, but the entire community will be using to ensure that their writing is as strong as possible. Okay, and I want to show you just 2 of the rubrics. These are the ones that I really like. Of course, some persons have adapted the rubric for their grade level, made it a little simpler. You are the curriculum designer at your classroom level. You are free to do that. There are two of the rubrics at the grades K to 2 level and grades 3 to 8. And there's a scale from beginning to exceptional, right? So beginning and emerging, developing, capable, experienced, and exceptional. So I'll stop sharing here and I will share just a snapshot of these 2 rubrics with you. And then we will go on to just have a quick discussion. So let me do a new share. All right, so this is the 6+1 trait writing rubrics for K to 2. You notice our first area here is ideas, and here's our key question. For each of them, they focus on the side here. You see A, you see B. So it tells you this one is focused on main idea. This one is focused on details and support, right? And we have a scale from beginning, does not communicate an idea through writing, drawing, or dictation. to exceptional conveys a rich, focused, and well-developed main idea in writing that is fresh and, or original. Please note that exceptional in for each of these traits does not mean in perfect standard English. All right? Unless we are talking about conventions or sentence fluency. Okay? So you will notice that students, if you think back to the first session where we had those visual representations of students writing, you will see, remember that little square that said 12 students are, their writing is developed and they're writing sentences. You notice the words were not spelled conventionally, right? But a complete idea was being expressed in that sentence. So remember that as we're going through and we're giving students feedback, that we focus on one thing. We focus here just on the idea. Here we focus just on the organization. And what are we looking at? We're looking at a beginning, a middle, and end. We're looking at transitions. We're looking at sequencing, and we're looking at titles, which is optional, as you see here, right? And again, you have from beginning to exceptional. So this is for the grade 2 level, grade K to 2. And are you seeing the second one that I just clicked on here? Okay, so this one is more for the grade 3 to grade 8 level, but of course you can use it all the way up. We're going to put these in the chat. I mean, it takes a while. If you want to go through the route of trying to download all of it, you know, all the best. But we've put it in the chat. You can just download them and use them. All right. So I'm going to run into the chat here and see if there are any questions or comments there that I can look at. Okay, so what if a child dislikes writing and also has difficulty writing and spelling, but has great ideas and speaks eloquently? We support the idea of allowing this child to use an app that records their writing 100%. Now, the great thing about the traits is that we're talking about how each trait is being developed. If we merge that with the idea of the writing workshop, if we think again about the fact that we want to build writing fluency and stamina over time, right? We always start with where a student is, right? The student is not great with the spelling and the writing, well, there's typing, and there's editing, there's always editing, so we can always go back to that. There'll be opportunities for you as a teacher to now say, okay, I noticed that these are some of the spelling patterns that are being a challenge. How do I go about teaching those spelling patterns, right? How do I build maybe sight word knowledge if that is what the child needs to be able to become a more efficient speller, right? And if we go back again to the spelling stages, we remember that all the way up to our level, we are still learning how to spell conventionally, all right? So, and we'll address this a little more when we're talking about how to differentiate and accommodate all of our students, okay? Can you see my screen again? I'm sharing my screen. Okay, so here's a chance for you to just share with us a bit. Two possible questions. One, you can comment on how would you use this approach at your particular grade level. I've also pulled up two of the challenges that we had in the Padlet. How would you suggest that this teacher, or how do you think the teacher can use the 6 traits to address these challenges? So you can share on either one. How would you use it at your grade level? Or how do you think the teacher can use it to address some of these challenges identified? Raise your hand and you'll be able to unmute yourself. Or you can share in the chat. No ideas yet? If you're a grade K teacher, is this something you think you would want to use or you can use? If you're teaching students at Form 5, is this something that you feel you can use as well? No one. Okay. All right. Well, maybe you're thinking about it a bit more. I noticed that a lot of our challenges that we have identified. Yes, the 6 traits. Do you think that you could use these 6 traits? You can use this approach where you will teach students skills to develop the 6 traits. Is that something that you can do in your class at your grade level? Right, Martin on Facebook says very correctly that it can be used at any level. All right. I guess maybe Tashali is not in. Maybe Tashali could have told us about how she's been using it with her own students as well. I know that she says it's been with great success. All right. Again, people, it's not something that we will do all at once. It's something that's been built over time. But an awareness, even for us, of what the 6 traits of good writing looks like is really, really valuable, right? It's really valuable even for us, right? Helena says she enjoyed teaching voice. Yes, yes, it really allows the students to be as expressive as they would like. It really helps them show their own writer's personality. Okay, so again, I mean, our 40 minutes are up, so there isn't a lot of time for us to explore activities that we can do at each to help develop each of those traits. But the mini lesson ideas do tell you what it is you can be doing with those students. One of the websites, I think it's ThoughtCo, has some suggested activities that you can do to help students understand what each of those traits are. So you can look up that as well for your additional reading. I noticed that a lot of the challenges that we've identified in the Padlet, they're really related to things like, generating ideas and expressing ideas and developing points and so on. And I think the traits here, focusing on the traits, is really a good way of addressing those challenges, right? Students will actually get to practice each one of these traits, right? Practice them not just by looking at what they look like in good texts, but looking at you as a teacher, demonstrate and explain how they can develop each in their writing, how to identify whether that trait is present in their writing. And then they will get an opportunity as they write to practice developing it. As they're practicing, you're also giving them feedback, timely feedback on how they're doing. Right? So keep that in mind, that it's going to be a process. It's something that you're going to have to plan for. And when we look at the writing process on Monday, we're really going to try to tie in all 3 of the approaches we looked at. So at what point in the writing workshop will you teach a mini lesson? What will you teach in a mini lesson? What stage of the writing process could you address at each point, and so on? We will really tie all of it together. And I want you to come to each session thinking about specifically how you can use it in your class, with specific students, with specific lessons, with specific challenges that you have. Okay, that's one of the ways that this is really going to be meaningful to you. These sessions are going to be meaningful to you. All right, now tomorrow we are going to look at, next week, Monday, we're going to look at the writing process. I know that you may be familiar with most of the stages, if not all of the stages, but we're going to try to look at the stages from a different perspective. No class tomorrow. No class tomorrow. We're going to have class again on Monday. So we're going to look at the stages. We're going to look at how to integrate the 3 approaches, and we're going to look at experiences that you've had, because I'm pretty sure you've used the writing process, and some expectations you have now that we're talking about how to integrate the 3 approaches. Something came to mind and it just flew right back out. Okay, so look forward to that. Thank you very much for your presence here, for your attention. And I'm hoping that these, I know these sessions are short, and we may be thinking that we do need a lot more time, but the same way we want to build We want to build writing stamina. We want to build PD stamina. Okay, we don't want you to get, we don't want you to get too overwhelmed. Has the 6-trait rubric been used for marking? Well, it's something that we've been encouraging teachers to use when they do the ECBLA, the students, and the writing portion. We actually encourage them to use the 6-trait writing rubric, right? You can also use it in your classes. It's totally acceptable to use it in your classes, okay? Remember, as we said before, introduce it to the students. If you want to bring it down to a level that they can understand, you can do that. Nationally, as a standard, well, the assessment unit, when they create the assessment tasks, they usually design the rubrics. But once I'm involved, I usually bring in elements of those in there. All right. You notice as we were going through the traits that I mentioned, there are some that we usually refer to as content, organization, mechanics, those kinds of things. Yes. Right. But of course, you know, we want to make sure that whenever we assess it nationally, it's specifically tailored to that task, whatever task we give in the students, right? This trait, this rubric obviously can be used across writing types, but again, you may, as the curriculum designer for your classroom, you may adapt it for your specific grade level, all right? If you want to share it with the students and you want to use language that's more student-friendly. You go online, people, and there are so many adaptations. You can select one of them wholesale, or you can select and continue to adapt. Okay? Thank you so much for attending. I don't have a fun poll for you today because I already know that you enjoyed the session and you will be back on Monday. All right? But thank you very much for being here. I hope it was useful. You can always tell me in the chat, you know. You tell me, Ms. Caglin, just rest on Monday. Or, you know, keep going. Thank you very much again, and have a good evening and have a great weekend. Okay, keep going. Thank you, Cornell Johnny. Thank you for letting me know to keep going. Okay, Helena said see me on Monday, so that means keep going too. I will. See you on Monday, folks. Take care.